Hello, everyone. This is Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network. And this is my weekly show where I randomly select something from my enormous, unmanageable movie watch list, and whatever it is, we go with it. And sometimes I have a guest. Actually, most of the times I have a guest, and we basically, whatever we get, we're going to talk about it. And joining me for this episode is Bubbawheat. Thank you so much for coming on for the first time. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, it's good to be on.
Awesome. And before we get into the film we're going to be talking about this week, Cries and Whispers, Bubbawheat, would you like to shamelessly plug anything for our listeners to check out some of your content?
Sure. I am also someone who has multiple podcasts, and I think I'll stick with kind of plugging the two more movie related ones that I have.
Mm,
One is pretty much finished. It's kind of in its sunset, and that was one that I did starting like October of last year, and Um, if you've heard of the movies by minutes format, I did Fight Club Minute. And so I
mm.
covered the movie Fight Club 1 minute at a time for 139 episodes.
There
And
you
that
go.
was a ton of fun. And the entire movie is out there. I was lucky enough to interview four of the actors. They were all smaller actors.
Mm,
It didn't get any big names, but I got the security guard from the airport security guard, which
mm.
is he is very memorable. I got the bartender in the Halo, the one that's kind of reveals the twist pretty much.
Mm.
And I got two of the three cops that threatened to take his balls like near the end.
That's pretty cool getting some of the, especially when you're taking the film so granular, maybe
Mhm.
getting some of the actors that are like, you had this one scene and we're going to talk about it. So that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
And then my other podcast, which is still currently going, is called "It's Time to Rewind." And
Mm,
on that one, it's kind of very similar to the movies by minutes format, where I take a time loop movie or an episode of TV and I break it down and I do one podcast episode per loop of the time loop. So my first season was Groundhog Day, and I broke that into 36 episodes, one for
nice.
each loop that we see on screen, and including and I always love this kind of trivia almost, but it's kind of the insanity, but it was a lot of fun. But there's a slap montage where he gets slapped 9 times, and
Mm,
over the course of like 10 seconds, and I it went to the level every single slap got its own episode.
nice.
They were extremely short,
Yes.
but they were a lot of fun.
Mhm.
And so the current, and I've covered several, I kind of alternate between movies and TV. I did The Twilight Zone, Triangle, Time Crimes.
Mm,
I did Buffy and Angel for a season. Um, I did Memento and 51st Dates, which are kind of time loop adjacent because I feel like
mm.
the characters are in their own personal time loops.
Yeah.
And right now, the current season, I'm doing British sci-fi and I'm focusing on Doctor Who and Red Dwarf. And there's several time loop episodes in there, but I'm kind of just sampling both of those episodes. I'm covering one episode per season of Red Dwarf and one episode per Doctor for Doctor Who. And whenever I get to the Jodie Whittaker special Eva the Daleks. That was kind of a true Groundhog Day style time loop. I'm doing that one in 9 episodes.
Very nice. I appreciate the creativity that you bring to it in terms of like committing to the concept because there's so many podcasts out there,
Mhm.
and being able to find something that feels unique and interesting and different is always a nice change of pace from things. So, but welcome to the show, and we are going to be talking about Cries and Whispers from Ingmar Bergman, who wrote and directed this film. This was released in the United States on December 21st, 1972. It is a Swedish film, about 91 minutes. This film cost $450,000 and made about $3.5 million, starring Harriet Anderson, Kari Silvan, Ingrid Thulin, Liv Ullman, and Inga Gill. And Ullman is definitely a recognizable name from quite a few of Bergman's films. This focuses on two sisters and a maid processing the suffering of the third sister dying of cancer. So, some light material as we talk about it, and dealing with the two sisters trying to bridge a gap in their own relationship. This is a period drama set in the 19th century, inspired by Bergman's mother, Karen Ackerblom, and Bergman's own vision of four women standing in a scarlet crimson room, which you can definitely see that as we're going to talk about the film in terms of its color and production design. This was filmed in Tenzing Nasby Castle in 1971, focusing on themes of faith, female psyche, and some biblical allusions, utilizes saturated colors, specifically of crimson, which is used quite throughout the film, which is very different from Bergman because a lot of his films are in very crisp black and white. Bergman's previous two films were very unsuccessful, and this film was a big change of pace as it was both a critical and box office success. And this was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, which is not very common, especially back then for international films. This did get a Best Picture nomination. It won Best Cinematography for Sven Nykvist and was nominated for Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Costume Design. But Bubbawheat, what are your general thoughts on the film?
I mean, I thought this was weird.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the best way to say it. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect going in because I haven't, I'm not a huge art film
Mhm.
connoisseur. I've only seen one other Ingmar Bergman film, the Seventh Seal, and I feel like
Mhm.
that's one of his more accessible movies
Mhm.
because I remember that's having a lot more humor than I expected in it.
Yes.
And there is, practically no humor in this movie whatsoever. And there's just a lot of really weirdness to it. But I did get invested in the characters. I do think that it really paints a fascinating picture, especially of the three main characters,
Mhm.
Maria, Karen, and Anna.
Yes, this is certainly a film that really leans into visual metaphor, leaning into some gorgeous visuals just in general from its production design and its costuming and its cinematography. And it's kind of like a raw nerve of a lot of feelings going on and a lot of pent up feelings and emotions kind of being let loose because of this very tragic situation. And, these performances from these four women are really impressive in terms of the layers of complexity that's going on between them. Obviously, you have the one sister who is dying in agony, which there's a few moments where it got really uncomfortable to watch, seeing how much pain this woman was in. And
Mhm.
it definitely deals with some really deep seated and uncomfortable feelings and connections between the two remaining sisters. And in terms of this push and pull. And I don't know if you have siblings. My brother and I have not always had the best relationship. And, you'll have those moments where you have these uncomfortable spells of like maybe you're mad at each other and you're kind of being a bit stubborn in terms of getting over things. But this film kind of takes that up a notch and takes it into some uncomfortable and strange places for sure.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
Yes. I guess were there any particular scenes that really stood out to you in the film in terms of maybe their visuals or how they made you feel or anything like that?
I mean, the definitely there's just a lot of little moments, and I
Mhm.
would say probably a couple big scenes, especially towards the end, because I mean Maria really jumps off the bat as kind of taking your interest pretty quickly whenever she basically has this moment with the doctor and this
Mhm.
um, seduction almost where she comes onto him and puts uh, puts his hand on her breast, and then they have a moment of kiss. They kiss, and then I think she asks him something, and then he just flat out tells her no, and then leaves. And I believe like the next scene is a flashback from what I can understand it, because I know this movie does play with time a little bit, and there are definitely scene changes, and it's not entirely clear if they're flashbacks or flash forwards. I kind
Mm.
of I I got the impression that most of them were flashbacks, um, especially this one, which kind of goes back to her, I guess, moments of her affair with the doctor from a few years ago. And I wasn't sure because I believe that that time the doctor is treating a sick child that was also named Anna, and I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be the same Anna that grows up and becomes the maid or not.
This is a film that's going to challenge you in terms of story structure and what's real or not. Because there's definitely these memories, these flashbacks to experiences in these women's lives. And there's also specific dream sequences that feel so vivid because the film doesn't do much to try to make it feel like it's not reality. And also, the film, I think, from how Bergman presents it, kind of has a strange dreamlike feel to it, whether it's because of the how it's shot, the cinematography, just the exaggerated like the any sequence in that red room is just so striking and uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And it's such an interesting kind of experience because there's some really messed up things that certainly
Yes,
happen throughout the film
the
because
movie definitely takes it definitely blurs the line between familial intimacy and sexual intimacy.
yes, especially between two of the sisters who are because you're trying to understand if they're trying to rekindle some kind of just sense of being sisters or if there's something else going on here. And is there a reason why these two have not been closed? And you see both of them. There's a whole entire specific sequence with uh I believe it was Karen or well, there's that whole sequence with Maria and Karen who they're trying to interact with each other and just even the experience of touch with each other becomes such a significant beat in the rest of the film up to the point where at the very end where you have it's just like a refusal to even have physical contact and you feel like this big betrayal. It's like, wasn't there some kind of growth between their relationship? But also, there's this presence of the men in their lives and the influence that they have that's
Mm.
interesting in terms of there was they show some very strange interactions with the men in their lives. This whole self
Again, to say the
mutilation.
least.
Yes. Um, there's this whole entire sequence of like self-mutilation in an uncomfortable sexual way that just is very shocking and very
Yeah.
unexpected because it's like, oh, we're gonna have a little bit of backstory here. And it's you expect like, oh, we're gonna get to learn a little bit more about maybe their relationship or this or that. And it's just like, oh, well, we're getting a better idea of where she is um mentally
And
and
yeah, and
physically
I definitely
and
got I got the picture that Maria is, the more um uh kind of presence. She's the more sexual of the
mm,
two, but she also is someone who masks herself. Like she puts on airs, she puts on a
mm,
personality. She's like trying to save face and hide what she feels inside. And then Karen is kind of the opposite, where she's repressed and
mm,
she's the one that's often wearing black and
mm,
and we see this in kind of two different ways. Maria is the one that has the affair with the doctor,
mm.
and then her husband stabs himself
Yes.
in shame, I guess. And then Karen is the one where she has this scene with her and Anna, and this is with a lot of this sexuality because we have the scene with Maria and the doctor, and that kind of cuts. There's not any on-screen sexual of a sexual nature. It's just cleavage and flirtation,
Hmm.
and then we also have a moment with Anna and Agnes where she comforts Agnes in a very sexually intimate way where
Yes.
she kind of she opens her shirt and lets Agnes lay on her bare breast, but that's also not really shown in terms of nudity. And the first and only nudity that we actually see is in this very non-sexual manner whenever Karen, the very repressed Karen
Hmm.
asks Anna to help her undress. And in that moment we do see Karen become fully nude as she changes into her nightgown. And then shortly after that, we get the second instance of mutilation whenever she takes this piece of glass from the dinner earlier because she drops this her wine glass and breaks it, and she saves this shard of glass, and then she cuts herself in her privates and then goes to bed. And then whenever her husband, who is much older than her,
Hmm.
comes in, she kind of flaunts this blood, and then she smears the blood on her face and in a very and kind of has this BDSM almost level of ecstasy, that she seems to be getting sexual gratification for this act.
It's it's so interesting on so many levels because you do have Karen's whole situation where it's very obvious she's not happy or
Mm,
fulfilled in her relationship. And I think the fact that her husband is older is an important piece to that feeling. And the feeling that, like, why would this older man want to be with a younger woman? And just for her body, and that moment of her kind of her self-mutilating herself is her taking charge of her own body. This is what she's doing to herself. And she does have some very erotic feelings of that moment. And that's a very powerful moment where she just like smears it across her face and you're just like, this is escalating to some very unhealthy places for these women. And I think that's the biggest challenge of this film. And you have Maria, like you mentioned, and the fact that like her own husband like stabs himself in the stomach, which obviously wasn't enough to kill him because he's in the film later specifically, but doing this out of the shame. And I think the performance that really stood out to me, and it's a point that you brought up, is Maria Liv Ullman, who was in Persona and other Bergman films, is her ability to just switch And that last interaction she has at the end of the film, where she completely denies this physical touching, this connection that she had with her sister. And she does it in, it feels like such a nefarious kind of way, where
Mhm.
she's trying to make her sister feel like she has no idea what actually is going on. And it's just like,
Yeah, and it's a contrast to the earlier scene because the earlier scene Maria is the one who's saying, we're sisters but we haven't really connected. I just want to connect with you. And then she goes to reach out and touch Karen, and Karen is the one that pulls back. And then Karen in that moment, she has this moment of emotional intimacy where tells Maria that she hates her, and basically kind of emotionally unloads. And then after that, then they are able to come together. And again, that this is this kind of weird moment of physical intimacy that
mhm,
also has hints of sexual intimacy in it. And is this another weird scene, and they have this conversation that's silence, that as the audience we don't hear their
mhm.
conversation. And then at the very end, that it is kind of reversed, where Karen is the one that's reaching out for this connection to Maria, and then Maria denies her of this at the end.
It's so interesting in terms of that connection that they have, because Bergman goes as far to certainly insinuate that there might be something more to that connection than just they have lost a level of just intimacy with each other as sisters. But he does it in a way that it's like you can't really confirm or not. You could only kind of glean how much that connection really meant between each other and what the real nature of it is, really by the actions of each other. And I kind of feel like there is something more there, because I feel like Maria completely backs off and puts this wall up. And like, is that something that you do just because it's like, oh, I haven't been close with my sister in a while, and now I'm feeling afraid of having some kind of connection with my sister, I'm gonna put that wall up. And then just how upset that makes Karen. And I think it's important that Karen feels so much sexual repression in her life. And Maria's one who seems so free about it, even to the point where it's like just a doctor shows up and it's just like, well, let's have this kind of moment. And they're obviously in very different kinds of relationships with their husbands, because Maria's husband's someone who seems to be living in shame and living in a situation where it's like, when's the next time my wife's going to do something inappropriate with somebody? And
Although I did get the impression that Maria and the doctor were ex-lovers. I got the
mhm,
impression that they had a relationship before the relationship she has with her husband.
and that wouldn't surprise me, because Maria seems to be the kind of character that has left a lot of connections with the people in her the men in her life. And both of these relationships between like Maria and Karen are so interesting. And then I think it's very interesting having this other character of Anna here, who's not one of the siblings, but has this connection to the situation. And yes, they have that very tender moment where she holds Agnes, and in a very, like, it's interesting because it feels like kind of a maternal kind of way, but
Mhm.
also in a kind of a sexual kind of way. But just gets to the point where it's just that her head laying on her bare chest like that, it's just some kind of feeling of intimacy And
Yeah, I feel like the film itself doesn't paint a clear picture of whether or
mhm,
not the two of them had a lesbian relationship or if it was just a you know, a familial intimacy between the two of them because she had been the maid there for 12 years.
yeah.
And it just that's that level of closeness. And they, you know, the men have a moment of dialogue where they say, you know, I Anna has become too close, and you know she doesn't know her place, even though the women, I forget which one, but they said, you know, they're trying to decide if they should, you know, give her a bonus as she
Mhm.
leaves, or and to let her have a memento from her time. And I kind of I took it as that, you know, maybe her and Agnes did have a um, sexual, you know, a lesbian relationship, and the two sisters kind of it was like, you know, the worst kept secret. And so they knew that this was going on, but it's one of those unspoken things. And so they kind of wanted to do something for Anna because of that without making it obvious.
Well, and that's a very powerful moment too when it comes down to like, oh, she could take a memento. And it's very much like, no, I'm good. Because and it's very patronizing to her in and you bring up a very interesting point as well because if anybody out of the four of them, the of Karen and Maria and their husbands, it's the sisters that have that feeling and understanding of like what was really going on here. And even if like Frederick's the one who's really taking that control in that situation, and it is a repression. It is if this was actually going on, we're not going to acknowledge it. And also, she's just the hell. And you also get that
Mhm.
kind of classist kind of perspective too, because they're very obviously a well-off family in some shape or form. And obviously Anna's the mate. She is the quote unquote help that is there. And obviously there's something much more impactful going on between Anna and Agnes. And even up to the point where Anna finds Agnes's diary. And at the very end of the film, this film has so many interesting threads to explore. And Bergman walks such a great tightrope of heavy implications without full confirmations. And it allows you to explore this film in so many different ways. And it always has you thinking, what are the true motivations of these characters? And you can process it for a long time afterwards. And this is definitely a film that sat with me for a while since I watched this a couple days ago. And it's this is all in like 90 minutes. Like this isn't even
Mhm.
a particularly long film. It's a pretty lean film.
And we haven't even talked about the you know, another kind of weird scene with the I guess the ghost of Agnes.
Yes. Which in terms of like obviously it's interesting because her passing comes earlier in the film than I anticipated. Because like I kind of figured like this was gonna be something that like builds up to the end of the film, but it opens the door for something like this whole sequence where Agnes returns to life and is interacting with Karen and then Maria and how they have their different kinds of connections and how it's so very interesting how Maria, Karen, and Anna all react differently to this kind of situation. And I think it says a lot about their different kinds of dynamics and relationships that they had with each other.
Mhm. And then it's the and there's also a lot of fades to red. You know, the
Yep.
red is a very dominant color, and you know, I think the women are pretty much only ever wearing either white or black.
Hmm. And I think it's makes a very powerful and striking visual experience of this film of keeping those colors very basic and very specific in each of these situations. And I know I mentioned in the notes earlier, but like this was different compared to a lot of Bergman's other films that did not. Like a lot of them were this black and white experience, and this is a very vibrant film in terms of and a richness to everything. And I'm just like looking through the pictures that they have on like IMDb, and there's very few shots in this film that aren't specifically red, white, and black.
Hmm.
There's a couple of shots, like especially like when it shows that like memory from the diary where they're like outside on swings, but a lot of this film and like even the use of blood being red is so important in terms of just the whole color palette of everything going on in this film. And this really feels like a film that was in complete creative control by a filmmaker. And this doesn't seem like the kind of film that Bergman probably got notes on, because it feels so very like visually striking, very specific, thematic. And like I can't even imagine what a studio would say about this film in terms of like all the different kinds of story beats that are happening. And it's I also find it kind of fascinating. Like this was a box office success and was nominated for Best Picture in
Hmm.
terms of how daring and artful that this film is in particular. But it does hit on a lot of very interesting and complex themes and will certainly challenge you to try to process everything that's going on. And the performances are incredible. A lot has to be said about the four women that really anchored this film down and how they bring so much life and complexity and just emotion to their performances.
Hmm. And the film ends in a a very pleasant memory as
Mhm.
Anna is reading the diary, and we get the flashback of the the four of them during one of Agnes's good health days, just
Mhm.
being on a swing, and just a moment where everything seems perfectly happy and complacent, and the three of them, but the four of them are together, even though there is still that class dynamic where it's the three sisters are on the swing and Anna is the one pushing them on the swing.
Yeah. And even coming down to Agnes wrote, "Come what may, this is happiness," which is in very stark contrast to the rest of the film because happiness is not exactly a word that I would describe a lot at all in this film. And it is I think that just really reinforces the rest of what happened in this film, that there are those fleeting moments of happiness in a life that's full of heartache and challenges and loss. And because, like, the whole entire crux of this film is about two sisters and a potential lover watching a woman die.
Mhm.
And Cries and Whispers is certainly very powerful in terms of what those two words mean for this film. But I guess, does anything else stand out that you wanted to bring up or any final thoughts about the film?
No, I don't think so. I think we really hit on like a lot of the big plot beats that really stuck with me, and really the overall feeling of it. Even though I think I've used the word weird quite a bit, but it is very striking, and it does, it's very impactful as well, and I did enjoy watching it.
Yes, and as I'm like filling out my Bergman experience, because there's a few of his films that I absolutely love, and this is a film that is definitely up there with like Persona as a film that it's just going to have you sitting there thinking about this long after you're done watching this film. And even just processing through this conversation and really digging in deep and thinking about it. And this is why we talk movies, because there's so many rich and interesting things that we can talk about, and there's a wide range of different kinds of films I've talked about on this particular show before, and this is definitely probably the densest and most complex and interesting. But Bubbawheat, thank you so much for coming on and playing some movie roulette and chatting some movies with me.
Yeah, it's always fun to not have to go through the struggle of deciding what to watch, and it's also good to have an excuse to watch an older and more challenging film, and because I do often enjoy them, but they are rarely at the top of my watch list.
This is definitely not that kind of film's like, you know what I'm really in the mood for? Some cries and whispers. But when you do take the dive into this film, it is certainly worth the experience for sure. But thank all of you out there for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. If you have dove into some of Bergman's films, what are some of your favorites? What are the ones that stand out to you? Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. The SPM Crew Podcasting Network has a wide range of different kinds of shows, whether it's about movies and television and sports and music, physical media, comics, and, just chat and life with Luke and anything in between. But a lot of great shows for you to check out. And if you like our logo, go check out HiFlyer Creative. They do some great work. And if you're ever in need of those digital marketing needs, there's somebody to check out. But most importantly, thank you as always for tuning in and listening to the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPM Crew Podcasting Network.